Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It is that time. It is the breakdown, preview, and prediction for Sebastian Fundora versus Keith Thurman. Everything you need to know ahead of their clash this weekend for the WBC Super Welterweight belt. But if you all could first, head down the bottom there, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and at the very end, leave all your thoughts in the comments below. This fight is so well overdue. This fight was originally announced last year, August 15th, to take place October 25th. It obviously gets cancelled October 11th. And rescheduled to now March 28th of 2026. So since it was originally announced, it's been 225 days and it's 168 days since the original fight date was going to take place. That is of the night of the fight. Now, that plays two things into this fight. Number one, it makes both fighters now have at least 225 days off of action. Now, to get into specifics, the last time we saw Sebastian Fundora fight, it was the 19th of July of 2025 when he took on Tim Tszyu. That was a round 7 retirement by Tim Tszyu, meaning Sebastian Fundora is going to be laid off 252 days. Now, Keith Thurman, he's coming in on a 381-day layoff since his March 12th date with Brock Jarvis, that fight finishing within 3 rounds. But if we look even deeper into this layoff from Keith Thurman, because Keith Thurman has been very, very inactive for the best part of 6 to 7 years now. Now, if we go back to 2019, July 2019, he takes on Manny Pacquiao. They finish in a decision loss to Keith Thurman. Since then, he has fought twice for a total of 15 rounds. 12 rounds with Mario Barrios in 2022 February and 3 rounds in March of 2025 against Brock Jarvis. Now, that is horrendous amounts of inactivity. There was a lot of injuries in there. Obviously, he was actually lined up to take on Tim Tszyu the first time that Sebastian Fundora fought him in 2024. That was originally Keith Thurman's fight. Keith Thurman ruptures his bicep in the lead up. Sebastian Fundora steps in on a couple of days' notice and takes on Tim Tszyu in that bloodbath fight, which we are going to talk about now. So for Keith Thurman, this layoff at 37 years of age has got to have some sort of impact. You know, you can't expect a guy like that to really come into this fight for the first few rounds looking overly fresh, overly with it. I feel like it might take a few rounds for Keith Thurman to actually get started in this fight, and that's a dangerous concept when you look at the way that Sebastian Fundora started his fight in the rematch against Tim Tszyu, where we saw a round 1 knockdown, and within the first 3 rounds of action, saw Sebastian Fundora break his own punch stats. And what I mean by that is, prior to the rematch between Sebastian Fundora and Tim Tszyu, Sebastian Fundora's highest amount of thrown punches within a round was 74 punches. And that was in the first Tim Tszyu fight. In the rematch, Sebastian Fundora had outscored that record per round twice within the first 3 rounds. So that was the type of activity that Sebastian Fundora and the type of energy he was showing early on in that fight. So Keith Thurman, he really can't be coming into this looking rusty, looking slow, looking languished. He needs to start quickly despite this long layoff. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Whenever Sebastian Fundora, the towering inferno, fights, there's always a discussion about the height thing. We would have all seen Sebastian Fundora fight. We would have all seen the face-offs that these two have had. Keith Thurman standing on a chair just to be level with Sebastian Fundora. Now, Sebastian Fundora stands 6'5.5" with an 80-inch reach. This compared to Keith Thurman's 5'9.5" height and 69-inch reach. So a massive disparity between these two fighters, but that is the norm when taking on Sebastian Fundora. But it's not the make it or break it in this fight because, you know, I was talking to Tim Tszyu during the week. It's up on the channel as well. I asked him, what is the hardest thing about taking on Sebastian Fundora? Is it simply the height thing, or is there other elements to this that make Sebastian Fundora such a hard opponent to take on? Because obviously a height and a reach advantage of that magnitude is a difficult task. But Tim actually said that the hardest thing about taking on Sebastian Fundora is the fact that you've got to constantly be thinking about what he is doing, and it tires you out, knowing that no matter where you are in that ring, he can find you. You know, if you're stepping forward, if you're stepping back, if you're stepping to the side, if you're at range, if you're mid-distance, if you're in close, no matter where you are, he can get to you. And that is a tiring thing to know because you're constantly concentrating, you're constantly thinking about what's coming back to you. But when you think about the height and the reach thing, you think, oh, well, the hardest things about that's going to be getting on the inside and hitting him, or, actually being able to close that distance and find your shots. Whereas it's not what Tim said. Tim said the hardest thing was actually being tired out. So what I want to talk about is the fragilities within Sebastian Fundora's game, because I've watched a lot of his fights. There is quite a lot of fragilities. All right. Keith Thurman, I believe, is crafty enough, veteran enough to find holes in Sebastian Fundora. And I'm going to point some of these out to you. I want to talk about some of the things that, Fundora tends to do and how you can get to Fundora. Now, the key punches when taking on Fundora are the uppercuts. That sounds stupid because of how tall he is, but Fundora is somebody that tends to fall in a lot of the time, and he also likes to fight on the inside. It has been reducing. I will say the last few fights, the Chordell Booker one and the Tim Tszyu rematch, there's been less inside fighting than what he did early on in his career, but he still enjoys in the middle rounds to get in close and fight on the inside, but he also falls in on a lot of his punches. Now, this opens up the gap to take uppercuts. All right, yes, he'll be reaching up, but the target is there to hit. The other ones are the overhands. Now, typically, you can get to Fundora very easily with an overhand right. That is the punch most people throw, and that's the one that most people land, especially on the southpaw. All right, so that shot is always open to land, but the left overhand is also very frequently landing in a lot of his film study, and it's actually the one that Brian Mendoza found a good shot with. One of the other fragilities that I've seen in Sebastian Fundora's game, this was less visible in that Tim Tszyu rematch. It does seem as though he's cleaning it up, but there was still a few occasions where you were able to counterpunch off a lazy jab of Fundora. Fundora can sometimes throw out that jab and not follow it up with that left cross or that left straight. So in this occasion, you have to be ready to pounce on that lazy jab, because once that jab's out there, it is a long way to bring it back in, and there's opportunity there to counter it. Now, one thing that I did see in Sebastian Fundora and what he has changed up a little bit about his jab is actually leaving it out there, hoping for a counter, and then he'll counter off your counter. And he did that against Tim Tszyu expertly. So there is occasions that you're going to have to worry about that left cross coming in following your counter, but there's always the opportunity to step out and land that shot instead of stepping in and land that shot. And I think that'll be a key to victory for Keith Thurman. Now, one thing that I've noticed about Sebastian Fundora is he goes through sort of a wave when he fights. Now, when Sebastian Fundora fights, especially recently, he likes to start the fight using his jab, using his range, using his reach. Middle rounds, he'll like to get on the inside and fight. Late rounds, he'll go back to standing on the outside and using that jab. Now, for me, the best time to get to Sebastian Fundora with the most success is when he's stepping forward to you. All right, obviously, it is the time to do it. But it also is the time that you're going to take the most amount of damage, because when he steps on the inside, he's actually at his best. Sebastian Fundora isn't naturally a distance fighter. He actually struggles with distance fighting. So that's why there's so many holes in it when he's fighting at range. That's what I mean about a lazy jab, about leaving things out there, about falling in. Because he's got that tendency to fight on the inside. That's where he's most comfortable. At range, it's where you find the most gaps. So he's easiest to hit on the inside, obviously, because he's right in front of you. But it's also where he's the most comfortable. If we compare this to another fight, if you look at the Brendan Figueroa fight versus Nick Ball, where I actually thought that Nick Ball was going to be able to beat Brendan Figueroa because Brendan Figueroa was giving him a stationary target right in front of him. It actually proved that Brendan Figueroa's reach and range and speed was able to outwork and outpace Nick Ball on the inside, where you'd think Nick Ball would have the advantage. You compare that to Nick Ball's performance against Ray Vargas, where he gets a draw, you'd say that was a better performance by Nick Ball, and that was against a Ray Vargas that was standing even taller and fighting at range. And if you were going to compare a fight for Keith Thurman, you're saying, Keith Thurman, have a look at what Nick Ball was able to do in that fight. And what I thought Nick Ball was able to do so well in that fight is, I know this is a completely different division, but there's not too many, comparisons you can make between such a height difference. And this is one of them, Nick Ball and Ray Vargas, was Nick Ball was able to quickly accelerate into his attacks. Right, he's standing on the outside, and then all of a sudden, bang, he's right up against you and he's throwing combinations. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to wait for that jab to come out from Fundora. You have to get on the inside or you have to get on the outside, rush him, and you got to throw a few punches. Because what Tim Tszyu did wrong in that second fight was he was getting on the inside. He was doing the hard work, He was throwing a big overhand right, landing it, or it was just missing, and then he was stepping back out of the pocket. You've got the ascendancy, you've got the aggression, you're on the front foot, you're pushing him back, you've got to get on the inside and you've got to couple it up. And that's what Brian Mendoza did in his victory against Sebastian Fundora. Now, Sebastian Fundora versus Brian Mendoza is a weird fight because coming into that final round where Brian Mendoza stops Sebastian Fundora, up until that, Brian Mendoza hadn't won a round yet. Brian Mendoza had won one round on one scorecard. And I believe it was 60-54 up until that point on all of the scorecards. But what he was able to do was, those few times that he was able to get inside the pocket, he was coupling every single punch up. And that ultimately led to what got him the victory on the night, because there's a few times where he got inside the pocket, ripped to the body 3 or 4 punches, ripped to the head 3 or 4 punches, took his own damage, probably didn't win those interactions, but come round 7, he gets on the inside, he lands that big punch, and the big punch worked so well because he coupled it up with another 2 that landed on Sebastian Fundora before Sebastian Fundora fell to the ground. And what Tim Tszyu was doing was he was landing that one big shot, it might have wobbled, it broke his nose, it did whatever, but there was nothing behind it, whereas Brian Mendoza was able to land multiple shots, which ultimately put Fundora down. And that's what Keith Thurman needs to do. When he does the hard work, when he gets on the inside or on the outside of that jab, gets in close, gets in range, whether it's a rip to the body or a rip to the head, it needs to be coupled up multiple times. Now, what has been continuously said in this lead up, and it's actually what I continuously say every time somebody goes in there and fights Sebastian Fundora. I said it in the first Tim Tszyu fight, I said it especially in the second Tim Tszyu fight, and unfortunately we didn't see it either time. But I feel like Keith Thurman might be crafty enough, have that experience to know. And you know what? He's been screaming it this whole entire time, and that is timber. That is rip to the body. That is cut down this tree. Because for Sebastian Fundora, there's 2 good things about ripping to his body. Number 1, the body's easier to hit on a taller fighter than it is the head because the body isn't moving. All right, the body is stationary. The body is in front of you. You can constantly jab to it. You can constantly work to it. You can step on either side of that jab and you can rip to that body. We saw how well he used those rips to the body against Brock Jarvis in 2025. That is Keith Thurman, and Keith Thurman will need to do that again. In that fight against Brock Jarvis, his knockout comes from that left rip that he does to the body. That starts the stem of bleeding because all of a sudden, all Brock Jarvis is thinking about is those body shots. The hands come down and the head opens up, and that's what you've got to do here against Sebastian Fundora. You'll either hurt him enough to the body that stops the fight, or you'll hurt him enough to the body that the arms come down, the body starts to sink, the head falls, and there's your target to hit. And that's where you have to get on the inside and you have to couple up those punches. So there's plenty of opportunity here for Keith Thurman to win this fight against Sebastian Fundora. But there's plenty of things that Sebastian Fundora does well, and I'm going to tell you now. Now, Sebastian Fundora, coming into that Chordell Booker fight and that Tim Tszyu rematch, up until those points, he wasn't the greatest offensive fighter. You know, he went 9 rounds against Tim Tszyu where Tim Tszyu couldn't see and he couldn't get more than a split decision. That shows how poor his offense was. And lots of that came down to the fact that he was so tall and so rangy, but couldn't fight at distance. And I feel like he took a lot of that on board. And coming into that Chordell Booker fight, coming into this Tim Tszyu rematch, we saw those improvements. And for me, lots of it comes off that jab. His jab isn't crisp, all right? It isn't one that snaps your head back consistently and works at you. But what he was able to do was he was able to learn how to pour it out. Just leave it out there, consistently working at that guard, pushing the hands aside to land the left cross, land that left straight, land the right hook, all right? And these punches here were able to open up the guards because of somebody that's so rangy. You're constantly having to pull them in. So you've got opportunity when they're coming in to push them back. But he was also able to use his range and reach to use that lead hook to go around the guard. Use it to pour away that guard. Because those few right hooks on your ear move the guard onto the side and then bang the left hand. Consistently able to find those shots against Tim Tszyu, against Chordell Booker. And these will be key in this fight because there will be points in this fight where Keith Thurman's on the back foot and he's standing back, and it's for Sebastian Fundora to find how to get through that high guard, and he'll show against Tim Tszyu that he can do that. Now, The one thing you'll say about Tim Tszю's performance was there was absolutely no footwork, so a stationary target was a lot easier to hit. I expect Keith Thurman, somebody that is very, very good with footwork, to be on the move a little bit more, and that's where that jab needs to be able to find its place. All right, with Keith Thurman consistently moving to his left, you have to be able to keep him in where you want him. And for Sebastian Fundora, his game has gone to another level following that Tim Tszyu fight. I do believe it is much, much, much better. I still don't think it's perfect. Like I said, there's plenty of fragilities in there to find out. But Sebastian Fundora, with someone with that height and that reach, and at super welterweight with that power, he's a trouble to everybody if he's able to land those shots from distance. Now, what are the fragilities in Keith Thurman's game? Well, for me, Keith Thurman is a more all-round and complete boxer compared to Sebastian Fundora. There isn't as many clear-cut opportunities there to hit Keith Thurman. Obviously, there are opportunities there. He got hit quite a few times against Brock Jarvis. You know, Brock Jarvis, somebody that isn't the most spectacular boxer compared to what levels we're talking about here. But the biggest thing for Keith Thurman is realistically something that he can't control. The biggest fragility in Keith Thurman's game is the fact that he is a welterweight fighting one of the biggest super welterweighters we've ever seen. That is the fragility in Keith Thurman. Because Keith Thurman, no matter what he does in this fight, will be the guy that has consistently have to shut the distance and land these big shots against a guy that will pick you off all around the ring. And that in itself is the fragility in Keith Thurman. There is a clear path to victory for Sebastian Fundora, and that is why most people are backing him in this fight, because he is the favorite. He is that guy at super welterweight to stop Keith Thurman. All right, Keith Thurman is coming off 5 years of barely any activity against one of the biggest tasks of his career. It's no surprise that Sebastian Fundora is the favorite. He will be able to pick him off at will consistently, whether he's stepping in or stepping out. So the real question is, what can Keith Thurman do to negate these natural abilities of Sebastian Fundora? How can he negate this height and this reach? And that is the question in this fight. This isn't a typical boxing match. This isn't two guys that are the same size and we're saying who's got the best boxing acumen, which style is going to fit the best fight. This is, how does Keith Thurman change up basically what he's done his whole entire career to find a way through this defense of Sebastian Fundora? And for me, it's quite simple. It is using your footwork, moving around the ring. Never give him a stationary target with somebody that doesn't have the best distance fighting. He's not going to pick you off as easily as some other people may. Keep on the move, be electric in your attacks, close the distance, find the body early, and your head will open up. And for me, Fundora here needs to be very careful to not overlook his opponent, because we've got Keith Thurman here who has, if you compare him to what Tim Tszyu did in that fight, in the second fight, unbelievable footwork. Tim Tszyu was, on his heels, not doing much, flat-footed, stationary target throughout this fight. And that plays two things. Number one, your defense is worse because your movement side to side is poor, but it also negates your offense because you want to be constantly stepping forward. And it was almost as though he was throwing his overhand rights and falling over his own feet because his feet weren't going with him. I expect Keith Thurman to shuffle those feet with him, keep the movement coming, get on the inside and land those few punches. And this fight here, for what all I've said about Sebastian Fundora's fragilities, Sebastian Fundora for me is still the favorite. All right, I try and give both fighters the best shot in these previews, say what they both do well, give them both, their credit for what good fighters they are. But for me, Keith Thurman's poor amount of activity, the fact that he is a natural welterweighter and not a big welterweighter, and not a guy that's always been a prestigious knockout artist. I mean, the biggest fights for Keith Thurman have majority all ended in a decision. Coming into this fight, a new division, he might possess that power, but I just don't see Keith Thurman at 37 years of age having the power, having one thing that he's so good at that he's able to beat Sebastian Fundora. Sebastian Fundora is not a complete boxer, but what few skills that he's really good at, for me, outweigh the fact that Keith Thurman is a more complete boxer, but he's not really good at one skill. And for me, to take on somebody like Sebastian Fundora, I think the most important thing is having that power to stop him. And I'm not sure welterweight Keith Thurman will have that power when he gets on the inside to stop him. Nor do I think Keith Thurman will be able to take the punishment it's going to, take to actually get on the inside and land those punches enough. So for me, Sebastian Fundora's natural ability, which is standing so tall, standing at such range, these improvements that he's implemented over the past few years of his boxing acumen will outwork Keith Thurman. And the other thing is, if this is all taking into note that Keith Thurman might be expecting Sebastian Fundora to fight at range. There's no guarantee that Sebastian Fundora fights at range. Sebastian Fundora is very comfortable on the inside, and I'm not sure Keith Thurman is good enough fighting on the inside to take on Sebastian Fundora. In fact, I think Keith Thurman is better at distance taking on Sebastian Fundora than what he would be on the inside. So if Sebastian Fundora does come out and really say, I'm not going to use my outside fighting today, I'm going to fight on the inside, I think it could be a very, very long night for Keith Thurman. And Keith Thurman's had a lot of fighting words coming into this fight. It is a big fight for him, but I think the long layoffs, I think the age, I think the size, and I think the fact that Sebastian Fundora is growing and growing and becoming a better and better, more powerful hitting fighter every time we see him, will outwork and beat Keith Thurman on the night. I don't think it'll be easy. I think Keith Thurman will have his times of success because everybody that takes on Sebastian Fundora does have their success. But Keith Thurman will only win this fight by knockout. I don't believe Keith Thurman can do enough over 12 rounds to get a decision against him. He has to do something like Brian Mendoza did. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that Keith Thurman will be able to land that shot. I'm not sure Keith Thurman's power will register enough to beat this Sebastian Fundora. This Sebastian Fundora is showing a lot better chin. And you know what? He actually looks bigger and more muscular and more lean than what he ever did taking on Brian Mendoza. That was a few years ago. So for me, unfortunately for Keith Thurman, I don't think one time will come up this time victorious. I'm picking Sebastian Fundora, a round 9 stoppage against Keith Thurman, Sebastian Fundora retaining his belt. Let me know, guys, in the comments below what you guys think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'm out of here, guys. See ya!